Morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the 2023 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. Hopefully you had a really great day 1. I'm so excited to be here this morning for this panel. My name is Tal. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, part of the organizing team for this weekend. And I'm honored to introduce this panel, Moneyball, the impact of Moneyball 20 years later. Our panelists today are Daryl Morey, president of basketball operations at the Philadelphia 76ers, Bill James, baseball writer, historian, and statistician, Shane Battier, former VP of analytics and basketball development at the Miami Heat, and Michael Lewis, author and journalist. The panel today is moderated by Jackie MacMullen, retired senior writer at ESPN. To give you a sense of how this works, we'll do the panel for about 45 minutes and then leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. You can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag MoneyballTurns20. It's up on the screens in case you forget it. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Tal. Wow, what a crew here. I'm just going to say hello and leave it at that. Michael, I want to start with you because I was thinking about this book, which came out in 2003, so I'm guessing 2001 or so is when you started writing it, give or take?
No, I met Billy Beane and started in on it spring training of '02.
Wow.
It was it was exactly a year wire to wire. I was done with it in a year.
Okay, so God bless on that.
Yeah.
But you had just come off, you'd written a bunch of successful books, including Liar's Poker, which was a runaway bestseller, and I'm wondering, as you went to your editor and said, well, here's my idea, was it a hard sell?
You know, it was funny because I had not ever published anything about sports. And they do think you should just try to do the same thing over and over again. But it was an accident that I started writing about Wall Street. I mean, there was no reason that I just happened to work there.
Sure.
I got so worked up about it. I mean, by the time I called the publisher, and it was a late night email, and I remember what triggered the email. And I got so worked up about it, I didn't give him a choice. And I said, this is going to upset you. The next book is it's not only the next book is about baseball, the next 2 books are. The first one's going to be called Moneyball, and I'm only writing it so I can write the second one that's going to be called Underdogs. And I had this whole, all mapped out. And this is, the next morning I got a call from my editor, and he said, I'm not going to, you clearly are into this, just do it. It took them a while before they kind of figured out how it was going to work. But and for them, with the publisher, it wasn't. They saw a connection. This wasn't for them a huge departure. Said, we'll just say Michael Lewis writes about markets, and we're just moving into the market for professional athletes. So they made a connection.
So this couldn't have been your first book then, because they would have said, yeah, no, we need something different. Right?
I don't know. Yeah, I think anybody who got this material. I stumbled into the material.
Right.
I think anybody who got the material, when I got the material, could have found a publisher for it. I mean, it was once you kind of framed it, it was so compelling. I mean, it wasn't about baseball.
No,
it was about the way human beings get valued, and baseball was just the example. So it was a joyous experience. I mean, the only thing that was not joyous about it is I wrote the first 2.5 chapters and they got stolen. My office was robbed, everything was taken out of it. I had to start all over from the beginning.
Are you serious?
Yes. So I had to start.
Oh, that's a writer's nightmare.
I had to start all over from the beginning. That was the only hiccup. But it was it wrote itself.
So when you rewrote them, they weren't the same. They couldn't possibly be.
They're better,
Right, always.
Yeah, yeah.
No, really,
They're
always.
better. Right?
That's a painful way to go to get better chapters.
It happens. But I had one hand on his books, on Bill's books, the whole time I was doing it.
Exactly.
I knew that gave me confidence in where I was, and there was no agony. There was no agony.
So, Bill, had you met Michael Lewis?
No, I had not. And Michael, I apologize for breaking into your office. But I had to leave my book somewhere, No, I had not met him before he was working on the book, no.
Well, I met him while I was working on the book.
Well, of course, but I mean beforehand.
I made the pilgrimage to Lawrence, Kansas.
Only way to see Bill James.
Only way to see Bill James. And yes, and he probably wondered what the hell I was doing. I remember him saying, that's an awful title. He hated the title. And I remember him also saying, He was very sweet about it. He wasn't being rude. He says, I'm never going to read your book. I don't really read books.
Have you read it, Bill?
No, he hasn't.
Well,
You've read it by now.
I read it. I did not read. Anytime I saw my own name, I like skipped 10 pages.
Oh.
I do not. I know people don't believe this, but I try real hard not to read anything written about me, because I'm hypersensitive, and I'll take anything as an insult. I like Michael and don't want to be insulted by his stuff.
So for those of you who don't know, because this is named the Bill James Room, and Bill James is a baseball legend. But, as we learn in Moneyball, at one point you were a night watchman, I'm going to say this, I wrote it down, at the Stockley Van Camp Pork and Beans.
That's correct. That's where I met my wife. She was working there. I was a night watchman. I worked in fast food and security job, guard and stuff like that for several years. I think a lot of people did. Well,
did anybody else here work at the Stockley Pork and Beans plant? Okay. But, you're writing your baseball abstract. I think 1977 was the first one
that is correct.
You published, and it was, as I recall, stapled together, and you sold about 80 copies.
Not quite that many, but yeah.
Okay, but this is your passion, so I think people need to understand the beginnings of that, because as Michael has already told us, it was the fuel for this book. But explain to people what was in that first publication of Baseball Abstract. Why was it so important for you to get it published?
Nothing of any significance was in there. I had ideas, but when you start out, you have no idea how hard it is to write a book. And so I started writing the book about the 76 season in January of 1977 with the idea of publishing it perhaps in March.
Wow.
No concept of what I was doing. And so there's nothing written in there that's very interesting. I just figured some stuff, like I went through the Sporting News and counted how many double plays were turned in the game started by each starting pitcher and stuff like that. Having done that and known that I didn't do it well, I thought I needed to do it better the next year. So I took another shot at it in 1978, and wasn't a lot better, but doing it repeatedly, I eventually sort of figured out what I was doing.
But in those papers, you were talking about the value of on-base percentage, which is really the foundation of Moneyball in many ways. You were also, I remember reading about errors. You thought errors in quotes were foolish because, again, I learned this, people when they first started playing baseball didn't have gloves. So of course there were a lot of errors, right, historically. And you were talking about the range factor. All of these things is a gold mine for someone who's writing Moneyball. I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Yeah. By the time Michael was writing Moneyball, the field was growing, and there were a lot of more solid and better researched and better thought out ideas that were percolating in the field in general. Michael writes some, I think. I've seen the movie a couple of times.
Do you close your ears when they say your name? Or?
I never know when it's coming. Michael writes about my being unpopular in the game, which I was. But honestly, I was responsible for a lot of that myself because I just took random pot shots at people. I kind of grew up with an antagonistic relationship with most of the world, and that worked for me as a writer when I was young. And I regret a lot of things that I wrote, and I'm no longer so literal about things like abolishing errors and replacing them with something more sensible. But that was the pathway that I took to get to where I eventually was.
That's so interesting. I think anyone that suggests, I'm going to use the word radical change in the game, in any sport, is unpopular.
Right.
Billy Beane was unpopular. And that brings me to our friend Daryl Morey, who, Daryl, I think you told, or did I read this in Moneyball? I forget now. I can't remember because I've read so many things about this leading up to this panel. You read Bill James's baseball abstract when you were 16?
It sounds about right. Yeah, maybe a little younger. I went to Walden Books at Summit Mall in Ohio, and the first one was yellow or green, so it was like 84. I was more like 12, I think, yeah. So.
And why was that so attractive to you?
Why? The original reason that I really was into data and baseball was because I wanted to beat my friends at Stratomatic and Earl Weaver baseball and these games that we would play on the Commodore 64. So I was in the first era of video games, and so Earl Weaver baseball was the best game. And to win, you actually needed these concepts. Like I like to win more than anything else. So if you're trying to win these games, you basically become like a GM. And people these days even ask me, they're like, oh, I play fantasy baseball, or I play diamond, pursue the pennant baseball, or strata. Like, how is that very much different from running a team? And obviously the people aspect's different, but the how do you select players is actually all that not different. Mm-hmm. And so that was my original reason to really get into it. And I was into math, of course. So.
But the human element of that makes it extremely different, doesn't it?
Extremely different. Yeah, of course. But if you're not always really, if the reason for this, if you're not relying on the foundation of what are the players who make the biggest impact, like you will make, you have to have that as your ground truth. I have a question for Bill. If you think you had better EQ and a different approach starting in 1977, would baseball have gotten to your, these concepts from you or others quicker?
The other people who were trying to do things similar to what I was trying to do, many of them were better people than I am, and many of them were smarter than I am, and perhaps had better analytical systems, but none of them had the package of things that was needed to sell it to the public. Part of which was the kind of aggressive attitude about, telling other people they were full of shit. Sorry. So some of it would have happened anyway because of the computer revolution starting not too long, the personal computer revolution starting not too long after I started the abstract, and that part of it would have happened anyway, but it would not have been united clearly with ideas, and because it would have been not been united with ideas that much of the baseball world found to be objectionable, it would have been less controversial, but ultimately less meaningful, I think. I think it would have been more streamed. The baseball world would have gone in one direction and the analysis of it in a different direction, but they would not have, I don't believe they would have joined at the same time and to the same extent that they eventually did.
I find it interesting because most people would think that if he had been less controversial, less adversarial, that it would have come quicker, that slowed it down. But I think you're saying it was a requirement to penetrate the temple of baseball.
That's it. It's status quo. People don't like people questioning status quo. It makes them uncomfortable.
Well,
and it also makes them insecure about their own future if they haven't thought of it first and they don't see it in the same lens.
It was an outsider movement. I mean,
100%.
What's rare is the insider who sort of embraces the movement.
But a lot of what you haven't said a word to Shane.
I'm amongst legends. I'm
trying
to help
here. Here's how we bring Shane in, though. So
I'm happy
Shane,
to be here.
First of all, how old were you when Moneyball came out?
2000. I could jump a lot higher. No, I was in my third year in the NBA.
Okay.
So I was about 20. I was an old senior, so I was about 24, 25 years old.
Right.
And the book was obviously revolutionary. I played baseball in high school.
So did you feel right away that was the case? When you read it, did you say, wow?
You read the book?
I read the book.
Huh. All right.
I read the book. I read the book, but I never correlated to basketball.
Okay, well, that was.
Oh, this is a cute baseball story.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, like the catcher goes to Alabama, gets on base, a lot of walks. Like, okay, I can sort of see that. So like, I understood it for baseball,
Right.
But I never, ever would have thought that had any applications to basketball, because basketball it's not a one-on-one sport like baseball is. There's 5 guys, and it's about heart and grit and determination and like
all those cliches.
all those things. Like, this doesn't apply to basketball. I never even made the correlation at all when I read it in 03.
That's interesting. So in 2006,
Yeah.
Daryl Morey, we've taken Daryl Morey, wait for it. Really, when the book came out, Moneyball, you, I believe, were still with the Celtics, yes?
I was with the Celtics.
Walking
yes.
through the hall, I had no idea what he did. I'd see him and wave, and I'm like, I don't know who
think
that guy
anyone
is. I
did.
wonder what he
You
does.
weren't on the basketball side of things, right?
I was
You're like
sort of
ticket sales or something.
sort of doing both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I came.
You
with
were
new-
in the back. You were in the lab doing data. You were. I know you were.
I came with new ownership, and when Wick and Steve bought the Celtics, the very first problems you have as a new team are not like running draft models. Like, they're like, what people do we want to run the team? And oh my gosh, we better make more money so we can afford the play. So they were like sending me at some of these problems as like not in charge because I was very young, but just
Kind of a fix
doing
it all,
analysis.
fix it all.
And then it took months before they were like, oh, now you can do some of this basketball stuff, and they brought in Danny, who's amazing, of course, and then Mike. We hired Mike Zarin, who got to work on it full time, but I was still working sort of on everything.
But in 2000,
point that we almost missed in the earlier discussion is that a lot of what baseball people believed was just wrong, and you couldn't really make an impact without facing the fact that they had a whole set of nonsensical beliefs built up, and there wasn't any way, whether you're a nice person or not so nice person like me, there wasn't any way that you could make an impact without telling them that they were wrong, and there wasn't any way you could tell them they were wrong without offending them.
Well, that was beautifully displayed in Moneyball. One of my favorite scenes in Moneyball is the very obese scout munching on a curler saying, I think Jeremy Brown's too fat to play baseball for us.
They said that when he walked, his thighs
yeah.
rubbed together so much they were going to start a fire.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
But it was, think of my position. He has generated the intellectual stuff. He's a beautiful writer. He was a joy to read. I walk into this situation where one team has sort of like embraced him. It's a secret. And I was traveling with the team with his books, and I would sit in the press box, listening to the press people, read their stories, interview people, hear what they were saying about the game. There was this whole kind of narrative that was so clearly false, and this whole other reality that was not being witnessed. And I just felt I was in possession of gold. It's a writer's dream. It's like, once you realize, like, the world sees one thing, and you see another, or someone has seen another, and there's this gap. You just drive a truck through it. It was just fabulous.
Did you understand the implications? I mean,
Oh my
20
God.
years. Did you when you were writing it?
I thought that if I do my job, I wasn't. So the funny thing is, like, when I'm doing it, the A's are amused that I'm there.
Yeah.
They don't think anything's going to come of it. And I had a conversation with Billy. Billy was pissed when he read the book.
Really?
Yeah, he was pissed. He called me up and he's screaming and yelling at me.
Wait, after it came out or before it came out?
The moment it's coming out, he got a galley, and he couldn't do anything about it.
No,
and he calls up and he's like, he's apoplectic, and he won't tell me why. And I'm thinking, I just spilled all your secrets. Yeah. It's over. Everybody's going to do this now. But he says, I say, why are you upset? He says, you have me saying fuck all the time. and I said, and throwing water coolers and all that. And he said, and I said, but Billy, you do say fuck all the time.
Yeah, and help you there.
And he says, you don't understand, my mother's going to be furious. Yeah. and he was completely seriously. And I said, Billy, I'm relieved, because I thought you were going to be furious because I just ruined your career. That it's going to be everybody. And there's this pause, and he says, you don't think anybody in baseball is going to read your book? He said nobody's going to pay. That Bill James's stuff is out there. We've been doing it. Nobody pays any attention.
But he's right. He was right.
Wow.
Everyone read the book.
He was wrong.
Well, he was right about.
He was right
about the book.
He was right about you weren't going to change the minds of the people who were already in position. However, the owner was friends with the guy who ran Goldman Sachs, and the guy who ran Goldman Sachs read the book and called the owner and said, "You're an idiot.
You're giving that access."
the owners of like the Mets, you're an idiot for the way you're running your organization. Read this book. And the change came with owners like the Rockets calling Daryl. That's how the change started to come, for the people whose money was being wasted. That was the mechanism, the biggest mechanism of change. But if you'd asked me, like, what's going to happen with this, I wasn't thinking about baseball. I really was thinking, look, you've got this, forget it's a sport. It's a corporate endeavor. You've got these employees on the field who are doing what they've been doing, the same thing they've been doing for whatever, 70 or 80 years, more or less the same way. And they're scrutinized by everybody. They have stats attached to every move they make on the field. And he and they have demonstrated that these people are not valued properly. If that person can be misvalued, who can't be?
Right.
I thought that's where we were going with it. I thought people were going to read this and say, like, around the office, like, it was about women in the workplace. It was about the way surface appearances cause people to misjudge. It was, that was what was going on in my mind. And I thought the baseball story was lovely, and for me, I'm taking up too much airtime here, I know, but for me...
It's your book, honey, keep going.
You're doing great, Michael. Just stop using the F word.
So Billy's the main character, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously the narrative engine for the thing. But to me, there was such huge emotional content in the stories of Chad Bradford and Scott Hatterberg.
Right.
These people who in Shane, and Shane becomes the basketball version of that.
Right.
But Shane's famous, so this is a little different. Shane's already famous by the time I get to him. He's a national player. Everybody knows he's good. They just don't know how good. But Daryl knows how good. But these people who are kind of obscure on the baseball field, who have these gifts, and the gifts very rooted in who they are, and who've never been valued. And the discovery of their value by this mechanism of reason was, to me, that was the heart of the book. And I wish I could tell that story. Oh, you tell it once, you don't want to write the same story twice. And Shane gave me the chance to write the same story twice, but doing it in basketball, and it was a joy to do it.
But I'm going to ask you, Shane, because you did become, I think, the poster boy for basketball analytics, and you've spoken very eloquently about it, particularly on the defensive end of floor. Yeah. How if you force Kobe left and make him take that jump shot, it's a 43% shot as opposed to going right and letting him go to the hoop, and it's a 62%, all of that. But I wonder, because I know that you used to ask for scouting reports from Daryl. You used to do things that other players weren't doing. Were they looking at you cockeyed? Did they know you were doing it? Were you an outlier among your teammates for having an interest?
Oh, absolutely. But I tell this to Daryl, and Daryl's become, he's always been a mentor, and now I consider him a very close friend. But he really changed my life. Because when he traded for me, in circa
people were unhappy.
04, 05, they were not happy. All right, they were not happy that they traded for this guy who averaged 10 points a game, 6 rebounds a game.
For those who didn't know, they drafted Rudy Gay, and everybody just burst into applause. Rudy Gay was a huge college star, and then they shipped him right along with Stramiel Swift, who was one of the fan favorites for Shane Battier. Just giving a little context.
Yeah, and the year before, Jerry West, who I love, he gave me my largest contract I ever had. But in those negotiations, the first conversation was, we'll never pay you what Shane wants. He can't dribble. He's unathletic. All right. You can't throw him the ball. All right. He plays hard. He's a good team guy, but he's not going to lead us to a championship. Okay. And so this is all the things I've heard in my entire life, that I wasn't athletic enough, that I was slow, I'm from the suburbs, I'm too soft. It kind of hurts now that I'm on the big stage. And so I felt super undervalued. I said, trade me, get me out of here. If Jerry doesn't want me, give me some, And so a year later, Daryl trades for me. And one of our first conversations is look, we value you higher than anybody else in the league. And I want to show you why. And so I'm all right, you have my attention. And he led me on this journey of data and analytics, and actually showed me some of the models that had me near the top of the league. It's something I'd never, ever experienced before, all right? So look, if someone says you're pretty good and we like you and this is why, you're gonna listen.
What do you remember? You remember being surprised by what they were looking?
Yes.
What particular do you remember that he was paying attention to?
Well, it was all in the explanation of what really wins you basketball games.
Yeah.
okay? Efficiency, all right? The value of not turning the ball over, right? The value of making open shots. Like, these are all things like, yeah, of course, this is part of my game. Like, yeah.
Slowing down other teams.
No big deal. So he's telling me things. I'm like, yeah, I do those things, but like,
Right.
does that really win you games?
I remember the couple things that jumped out at me because once he pointed them out, you noticed them, but you didn't notice them before. He said, like, Shane, not athletic enough to block a lot of shots, right? That's what he said. But watch what he does with his hand when Kobe's going up. He doesn't try to block the shot. He puts his hand in front of his eyes. And he says it's much more effective. Yeah. He also said Shane is also very aware of statistics and their effect on the value of the contract. Watch when Shane has the ball at the end of a half, and he's got at half court, and he could take the shot.
Taking
he
it.
waits until the buzzer goes off so it doesn't lower his.
Well, that was annoying. don't celebrate.
I gotta eat, right?
There's a long line of guys.
What Daryl did, and Michael wrote about, and Bill, you started, was really crystallize process, right? And in sports, we were so results-oriented. The box score, right? The column in the paper. That's what we're judging.
The myth of plus minus.
The myth of like what makes you a productive athlete.
Right.
Right? Before abstract came out, we didn't talk about process. And so now, for the first time, I'm around a guy who talks process, that the result actually doesn't matter. The result is actually a byproduct of your process and all the things that go into it. And I said, that makes all the sense in the world to me. And so like this is why this is revolutionary. Because for the first time really in the history, we talked about process. Now Bill Walsh talked about these things, but why do we have the stats that we do initially? Because they're the easiest things to measure. Do you make or miss a shot? Do you grab a rebound or not? Right? Not the best measure of what.
No, the availability of the rebound is the availability of the rebound is the stat.
The process, and that's what is revolutionary.
Can I bring this to today for a moment? And it's still that it's frustrating. We still struggle with how teams, because the teams have gotten very sophisticated in basketball, but the players from coming up through AAU and even college and everything, they still have no idea how to do the things that the teams will value, and it's a huge mismatch that still causes a problem where I'll talk to my colleagues around the league or even people on my team still, and they'll still be focused on how many shots am I taking, right?
How many points?
We'll have people in the ear of players literally say, you need to miss more shots. Now, they're not idiots. They're basically getting to the concept like you need to be confident enough to take and not worry if you miss. We talked about that in clutch. But they don't communicate it that way.
Sure, of course
They communicate it like you need to get your shots up, not you need to get good shots up. And so it's very frustrating that if we could align, we still have this terrible misalignment in basketball and maybe other sports. I don't know how this is in baseball. Maybe you can talk, Bill, but there's a big misalignment to what people think will get them paid in the NBA and the things that now do get them paid, like a PJ Tucker or a.
They haven't figured it out?
I don't think they have.
Shocking. We've seen some very sophisticated agents and people that almost do the reverse where they hack the system. They know how draft models work, so they're like, I'm not going to like maybe play as fundamental defense, and I'm just going to go for steals because we know that those drive some draft models and things like that. So there are people who are smart and like hacking it the other way, but no, like the culture of I just need to get up points and that's what's going to get me paid is still there in a huge way in the NBA.
Well, but it's a general principle that hard information always is preferred over soft knowledge, even if the soft knowledge is really what's more important. And this frustrates me as well. I should confess that one time about 10 years ago, I helped to convince Daryl to draft a KU basketball player who shall remain nameless. And I found out a year or two later he was terribly frustrated for the exact reason he was just talking about, that this guy had the ability to have a long career in the NBA if he would just do what Daryl was trying to get him to do, but he wouldn't. And last I knew he was playing in overseas somewhere. So anyway, but one thing that the old school baseball professionals say, which is no doubt true, is that what I call team positive behavior and team negative behavior is really actually very important. I don't doubt that it is. The only thing is you can't measure it. And because we can't measure it, it has little impact. It's soft knowledge, and it just gets pushed aside by hard knowledge. So really the biggest thing that we have, the biggest gap in our field, the biggest thing we still have to figure out is how to define and measure team positive behavior and team negative behavior. That's my opinion.
But how will you ever measure that?
What's that?
How can you ever measure that?
You have to put cameras in every room. No, just
No, I mean, I think it's going to be an intangible.
No, I don't think it's always intangible. You can measure, you can talk to people. Well, with the Red Sox, one thing that we did was we would ask a player when we drafted him, of all the people you've ever played with, or played against as an amateur, who would you want to have at bat in a game situation? And this one guy, I'm blanking out his name now, he didn't make the majors, but we asked him who he would like at bat, and he said Dustin Pedroia, who at that time nobody was scouting. And he says, Dustin Pedroia, he's this little bitty shit, but he could just hit the crap out of the ball. And so we started following, and we did draft him. Well, that's a small step in that direction, right? But you could track things like and you could teach things like, does the player help to build the confidence of younger teammates? Does he do things that are a distraction from the team? Does he? Well, I've said enough. But it is.
You don't have to do that because the coaches in the NBA are, I would say, well, you can tell me they're extremely attentive and focused on that because it is very important. You can actually really hurt your team in the NBA, especially if you're a good team. If you add the wrong player, right? You can really get negative. We have a much smaller team set, and I'd love Shane's thoughts on this, but I would say coaches sometimes overvalue it, but for sure it's a real thing. Like if you are adding someone who hurts the confidence of one of your better players, I mean that could be completely the worst thing ever. So
I have a question about leadership. So I think leadership sometimes is misinterpreted. Your leader isn't always the guy that's getting 25 points a game or his on-base percentage is through the roof. Leadership to me is, and maybe it is an intangible, maybe there's a way to measure leadership. So I guess I would ask all of you. We'll start with you, Shane.
Yeah.
Is there a way to measure leadership?
There are a few ways that leadership's exhibited. I played for Hall of Fame coaches up and down the line.
Right.
Coach K, Eric Spoelstra, Rick Adelman, Jeff Van Gundy, Mike Fratello. A great leader connects people with a future they don't know. Okay? So they have a vision for this is the future and this is how we get there. Okay? Great leaders, they allow their people to think for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
We're part of this, I'm part of this. It's not my plan, it's our plan. Great leaders allow for individual consideration. So, as a leader, do I treat everybody fairly but differently?
Oh, you have to.
You know.
That's a Moneyball. 12 different pitchers. You need 12. Go. I wrote it down. Hold on. It's because it's good.
So did I.
I know, you wrote it first. If you have a dozen pitchers, you need to speak 12 different languages.
Exactly.
That was Moneyball.
You know, so how you measure that, right? Simple ways, we talked about it, you know, time spent at the gym or the field, right? Everyone's got his key cards. Are people coming in at the last minute? Are they coming in late? Mm-hmm. They actually enjoy being in an environment where they want to be, right?
Yep.
Right? We talked last night. Like, I know there's been some research on just physical connection, you know, literally counting the times people come together and touch physically. When there's trust, you're more apt to actually have a physical connection with your group. You feel safe.
Really
It's
good
an evolutionary tactic,
Yep.
right? From our days hunting wolves in the jungle.
There are no wolves in the jungle.
No, there's no way. Yeah, I was gonna.
It's a metaphor, Michael.
know.
It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
Wolves in the woods.
Shane, can I ask, your son's playing basketball now.
Yes.
Are the kids focused on the right things that drive winning, or are they focused on some of the, maybe what you'd call like individual accolades?
I find it very difficult for young people especially to sacrifice self for the sake of the team in this Instagram world. You know, they're inundated by, you know, the phone, the TikTok, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And this is an affliction that our NBA players and our MLB players deal with.
All the time.
Right? Look at me, my life, look at me. And so the thought of sacrificing, you know, my personal gain for the sake of the team, which I may never be recognized for how great I am, which may in turn limit my financial upside, is terrifying. Terrifying. So great leaders can get people to let go of, look, you will be recognized if we win. Right? I tell people, I only get 2 questions about my career. It's not how many points did you grab, what's your career high. Couldn't tell you, I have no idea. They say, where do you keep your championship rings, and how do you decide which one you want to wear?
There you go.
Right? Now that's legacy. Yeah. So to be a part of a winning team, that's the way to get individual recognition.
Daryl, who's the greatest leader you've ever had on your teams? You're not going to answer that, are you?
No, it's, I'm thinking. We had some really good ones, yeah. Oh, can I come back? I will answer.
No, we can come back to that. No, so you know, there's a lot of New Englanders here. Obviously, I watch the Celtics a lot. You're talking about taking care of the basketball. It's an unpopular thing to say in Boston, but I don't think they can win the championship because they don't value possessions. And I still think for baseball, getting on base remains the most important thing. It's so simple, yet Bill, you were telling people this for years and no one was really listening. Possessions in basketball, I feel the same way about. I wonder when you look now at modern analytics, and I'll ask Bill and also Daryl, like the Raptor rankings. Do you put any stock in Raptor rankings? It's an analytical tool that I think is pretty accurate. I wonder how you feel.
What is it?
I'm familiar. It's Nate Silver's company.
It's good.
Creation.
All right, okay.
It's a combination of.
Yeah, I respect Nate.
So the reason I bring this up is Derek White is in the top 15 in the NBA in the Raptor rankings. He's a player
Can't discuss
people
him
don't think of
specifically.
as a star, right? A superstar. And yet I would say he might be the single most important person in what happens to the Boston Celtics.
I believe, and Bill and I have talked about this, there's a sort of a public sphere of what's available, and then there's now what's at the teams. And
Is there a big gap?
Oh, I'm sure.
It used to be enormous in baseball.
Yeah,
where
yeah.
The public stuff was actually way better than the teams
right.
had, and now the teams, I believe, are quite a bit ahead of what's in the public sphere. Although that's a closer gap. I believe in basketball, the internal top teams have much better than the public sphere. We have better tracking data. We have all this kind of stuff. So I personally don't focus a lot on the Raptor rankings.
Okay.
I do think that of the public sphere, like sort of these all-in rankings, I believe it's in the top tier of the ones to look at. Yeah, but the fundamental.
What does your internal data give you that say?
It's the tracking data, and so you can do a lot more with that. Like you can know how challenged shots are. You can know the start state's a big impact on basketball data. So whether or not you get the ball kick ahead to you in transition and you're just going in for a layup is a huge difference versus if you're late in the clock and having to generate a shot against Shane Battier.
Right, driving against
but both of them in the boxer look like a shot and it went in or it didn't. And obviously Raptor and those others adjust as much as they can with the data they have, and they do as best you can. But without the tracking data, you can't actually isolate a lot of these.
Sport Vision helps. Sport View.
Oh yeah, a lot of these. Yeah, no. There's good, yeah, you can buy if you can get all that data and synthesize it, but now teams have, large teams of people putting lots of time in, and so, but of the public ones, they do pretty well.
I have a question for all you guys. So we talk about just like...
It gets MVP wrong.
When we talked about, was I surprised about the intangible things that I did? Like, I wasn't surprised that I did it, but I was surprised at the impact. So across your writing and your research, what's the appropriate level of awareness players or coaches should have for those things?
Yeah, it's a real question. I actually thought there were going to be lots of Shane Battiers, lots of players who would be wanting the data and looking for, be very integrated. Like I want to work together to create an edge, right? And that really hasn't happened. I think the game's also evolved. Coaches have become very smart about setting up the systems and structures such that you're playing in an optimal way. They've done this forever, but now there's data that they use. So they set up the systems and structures for spacing and all the, like your actions. You used to set pick and rolls below the three-point line. Now often you'll set them above so that, you know, if they go under, now it's a 3 versus, you know, so that's the simple example. So you don't, long way of saying, like, we talked about clutch, like, you don't really want most players, and I'm surprised Shane could do it, thinking about the 20 thing. Think of your golf lessons. Like, you have your golf lessons, your elbow, whatever, but when they say to go swing, they don't tell you to go, like, think about all the stuff I just taught you. You just need to be able to swing at that point. And so I think it makes sense that players haven't. But I assume there'd be more Shanes that would come along and say, let's work together, even if just to like suck up and try to get a contract. But there's a lot less of that than you'd expect. And coaches have done a very good job integrating the data and analysis into how they have the team practice and perform so that the players don't actually have to understand everything, if that makes sense.
But you were interested, when you were interested in things like where you put Kobe on the floor to minimize his efficiency. Yeah. That kind of thing. And that is something you can.
I don't need to suck up to Shane, but to this day, he's the only player that
amazing
would
shocking, actually.
We would give him the analysis, and he'd very smartly say, "This isn't sufficient. When I'm in this moment on the floor, I need to know this or this, and this data is not helping me." And sometimes we'd have to come back and be like, yeah, you know what, we can't help you there. It's too complicated. You just have to use your instinct. But sometimes we'd be like, no, this is a very clear thing, and we should have been giving you that. And they were, he and Sam Hinkie like literally worked together
every day
to create the report that he exactly wanted.
My perspective was like, if you're taking a test, do you want the answers before the test?
Yeah.
Literally.
Well, I mean, I give you the opposite.
Literally.
That when I was like 2 months into working on Moneyball, and you could see that the front office was engaged in this kind of lab experiment, and the players were basically the lab rats. And they were doing stuff that the casual fan could see was weird. The leadoff hitter was fat and slow. There was someone playing first base who never played first base, all that. And I remember saying to the front office, I said, like, do the players, like, they know all this stuff, the reason you're doing this, have you, like, explained it to them? And Billy said to me, it just confuses them, we don't tell them anything.
That's interesting.
And he said, actually don't tell them. And I said, well, like, why not? And I remember him saying, he said, you don't understand, you can't be too stupid to play baseball. and he said, they won't understand it, it will just mix them up.
Yeah.
And it actually turned out not to be true. Yeah. That I went and when I started to talk to them, they were riveted by what was going on. I don't know, there's something, there's a two-culture thing going on.
But not all of them were. Like
no,
Ray Durham, I thought that was a really interesting part of the book. So Ray
Some of them just didn't care.
Yeah, Ray Durham was a base stealer.
Right.
And he came to the A's, and Billy Beane said, yeah, you're not stealing bases here. We value men on base too much. You're not going to, I think.
Don't risk it.
Yeah, we're not going to have that risk. And he's like, it's what I do, and left as a free agent the next season.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But I think your question was, do you have to know this stuff in order to manage successfully? And my answer is no. You have to know something that other people don't know, and you have to know how to apply that, but it doesn't have to be this. Right. Billy Martin was a very successful manager, and I guarantee you he wouldn't have understood or, he wouldn't have had a kind word to say about anyone on this stage. But he knew what he was doing. You have to know something. What he liked to do is
how do you know he knew what he was doing? How did you?
By his record. What he was really good at was putting the fear of God into people. I
don't know his record tells you anything. Like, he could have just had better player. Like, what do you mean?
No, every team that he took over improved dramatically.
Okay, there you go. I was waiting for that.
You're helping him to become Bill James.
But Whitey Herzog, who I admired greatly, but he didn't use the kind of ideas that I use. at all. But what Whitey was really great at was there were a lot of drugs in baseball at that era. And Whitey was like really good about getting those guys out of his clubhouse in record time. If you found out a player was doing that and it was starting to spread, you are gone. Makes a big difference. And
I have this theory, Bill, though, that you're just, because you were the outsider who was not nice by your own words to everyone, now you're just on an apology tour of just trying to be nice. You're just trying to be nice to everyone.
No, you know what? I have another theory about him. It's similar, but he thrived as the outsider. He's now totally the insider. The games have been overrun by his kind of thinking, and he's uncomfortable on the inside. So he's putting himself in opposition.
You're saying like Billy Martin?
He's in opposition to the move that he created.
And I always
Billy Martin
recognize
is
the
scary.
limitations of my own ideas. And that's all it is I recognize, because I've lived with these ideas longer than anybody else has, I recognize their limitations more than some other people do. And there are a lot of people in our field who give us a bad reputation by insisting that everything we say is God's truth, which it isn't. It's all true up to a point, and then you have to start thinking about the other stuff. And I've moved on to the point at which I'm thinking about the other stuff, and I'm sorry it offends you guys.
No, you just overcorrected.
I don't even know what to make of that. I'm going to just take some questions because we're getting to that point. And Bill, I'm going to find one for you. Okay, let's see here. So, well, this is kind of interesting. Was, in fact, there anything about the Moneyball mindset that had a negative impact on the sport, in your opinion?
I think that's the question I just answered. Yeah. People.
One class of priests was replaced by another class of priests.
Somewhat, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
but I guess I want to get a little more specific in terms of.
I think I can answer your question. We get blamed for a lot of stuff that actually doesn't have that much to do with us. I mean, people think that the shifts did come from analytics, and I don't know that they were great. But they didn't have a lot of impact, really. And I mean, everybody does them, and you have to do them because you can win an extra game a year by doing them, but you can't give up that game. But
why don't you love the shift? It's like this interesting dynamic of the game
whereas purists just
it added degrees of strategic freedom that people took advantage. It's very interesting. Like, why wouldn't you love the shift?
Well, what I was trying to get to is that people think that the constant shifting of pitchers to relief pitchers and the constant rise in strikeouts and home runs, that those have something to do, and the death of complete games, that those have something to do with my ideas. But the reality is that all of those things started long before all of those trends, all of the major trends that are have shaped baseball into the sometimes boring thing that has become in the last few years. All of those trends go back to the 19th century. And what happened is they just got bigger, and they go back to the 19th century because they represent essential truths, right? And they just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, we did feed the monster a little bit, so they started to grow faster rather than leveling off. But we didn't create any of those trends, really. And a lot of people think we did, but I don't think we did.
Okay, Shane, how much does player intelligence and having an analytical IQ go into buying into the use of data?
I would say curiosity is more important than intelligence.
Okay.
Right? Having an open mind, examining examining your process. Can I improve? And like, there are a lot of players that are voracious about self-improvement and will do anything. When I grew up, I had friends who all had the platform shoes. Remember those, like little thing that would improve your vertical jump? There's versions of that everywhere. Now, we gave those same players SATs, probably didn't score very high. Yeah. But there has to be an intellectual curiosity about, this is interesting. And that's the role of data. I tell them when Zach and Liam, if they're here, and BHEC, the role of data is to get someone to say, that's interesting. That's the job. When researchers produce, that's funny. And that will spur innovation, that'll spur inspiration, right? And so, trying to help our players, we're just trying to get them to say, that's interesting. That might help.
When you were with the Heat, was there one player in particular that was willing to do that.
Yeah, I told this. Well, I told the story in the earlier session. You know, I told the greatest player of all time, LeBron James, made him, probably 2 bips better as a basketball player. We're playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the splits on Kevin Durant, like he was better going over his right shoulder versus his left shoulder by about 20%. It was a pretty vast split. So I said, LeBron, just if you're on KD, make him shoot over his left shoulder, God saved me because he gave him 2 possessions, and LeBron made him go over his left shoulder, and he missed both shots. And LeBron
now you
said,
have his attention.
"Damn, Batman, that was great. What else you got for me?" So I didn't have the heart to tell him about sample size and variance and normal distribution. Like, LeBron, I got everything for you. But like LeBron, was one of my favorite teammates because he was curious. He was always curious, and he wanted every advantage. And we talk about the soft skills, like the upside of players who are curious about their games and will look to every advantage, whether that's sleep, nutrition, weight training, training drills, like that's where true upside lies.
All right, Michael, what's your process for choosing projects? Because this one was a grand slam home run. And how do you decide, yes, this can work, I can take this forward?
It's messy. It really is. I kind of move through the world looking for things that interest me. When they interest me, I spend some time with them, and then start thinking about how you would kind of reduce this to a narrative. And sometimes it takes a long time. I mean, I've had projects that, from the moment of colliding with the idea to the moment of execution, is years.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like this. It's like a month into it, I knew what I had. And for me, there's always one test. It's a feeling. It's when I've got to the point with the material where I ceased, it's no longer my ambition. It's no longer, I'm in a sweaty mess wanting to write a book, where I feel an obligation to it. Like, this is so good, just keep yourself alive long enough to do it because it's so important. And if I get that feeling about it, I do it. And if I don't get that feeling about it, I don't do it.
That's awesome.
I have to volunteer this. I don't think I ever told anybody. When Michael visited me in Lawrence and was working on Moneyball, he told me he had just come from visiting his old friend. His name was Tui, as I recall. And he was the Tui family had just brought into their household this 300-pound high school kid, named Michael Orr. And he just thought it was a fascinating story. I don't think at that time you decided to write a book about it.
He was my high school teammate, and
right.
and I thought, I can't write a book about a kid I was in high school with, but you had The Blind Side happening. It's true. I encountered that before I encountered the Moneyball story, but I just thought it's indecent. I can't write about this. But it built and built and built, and I thought, I can't not. There's an obligation here. Right. And so but it's funny, but it doesn't start with such a noble spirit. It starts with like ordinary ambition. Yeah. Like, I'm a writer. I'm supposed to find stuff to write about. I'm curious about the world. But when it gets to a point where it's beyond that, then I know it's sort of worthy of the time. And books are, as easy as Moneyball was to write, books are generally a pain in the ass.
It's the worst thing ever.
So you're gonna hit spots where you just don't want to do it. And if the only reason you're doing it is like, I want to write a book,
financial gain,
or whatever it is, it's just going to all fall apart. So you've got to have that other thing. So it's just, and it really is a feeling. And I've been lucky enough to have it a bunch.
I was going to ask you, is there one project that you went down the road and said, I'm not feeling it, I got to let this one go?
I told you that when I sold Moneyball, I sold it as 2 books, and the second book was going to be about the kids that the A's had drafted that year, and I was going to follow. I thought that Moneyball would sort of tee it up, and we'd see the role be a combination of these coming of age stories, these people, young people trying to make their way in professional baseball, and also that a lot of them had this new valuation imposed on them. The fat catcher who didn't think he was draftable, and he was a first-round draft choice. And I was going to follow the way the change in perception of them affected their lives. And it was going to be, and I thought I was going to get deeper in the weeds in the analytics movement.
You get a chance to do that, Michael, with me.
Yeah, that's right.
No, but Michael, I mean, every speech I do, I owe you royalty. Because you made what I did palatable for people.
Are you paying up today? Are you going to pay up today?
I am. I will.
But that book got eaten by Moneyball.
Yeah.
And also Moneyball,
it was a cease to be interesting.
Well, but also Nick Swisher, it was a very fine Major League Baseball player, but he was only with the A's 3 years.
Yeah, whether they were the A's or not, that didn't matter. What mattered was the whole Moneyball just went boom, and there was going to be anything new or interesting about this other thing. But so I spent 3 years in the minor league system. I was in uniform for the Midland Rockhounds in the dugout. And I had all kinds of stuff, but it didn't add up to you need to write this book. So I did a lot of work on that and just gave up. I thought,
my takeaway from Moneyball when I read it, actually, because I was working on draft models with Mike Zarin at the time, was my literally only takeaway was their assumption on who they're drafting is probably wrong. Because they, at least as perceived in the book, now this could be unfair to Paul, was that if you're good in college or wherever, that you will then be good.
Well, that was all going to be part of that. But they admitted that, look, it isn't that we know how to do this. It's that clearly nobody knows how to do this. And if we start to use the data we have on them, maybe we'll get. So they had funny things. They had a kid they drafted in the first round who had a lot of power in college, and they didn't bother to go see what his home ballpark looked like. And it had a 270-foot left field fence. And he was hitting fly balls out of the park. And it turned out that's what he did. And so there was a lot of that, but it seemed trivial. It seemed trivialized by what.
But it's interesting. They were starting on the path that every team went. What happened there, which was.
Right. Well, and the biggest fear, the reason it took everybody so long, is the fear of risk. If you're not willing to take the risk and in some cases fail.
It's social risk.
Right.
Yeah.
And the pressure is immense, and it gets even worse in today's media, social. I mean, when you guys make a mistake, any of you now, my goodness.
It's why Shane's teammates Chuck Hayes did get basically no sniff in the league because he couldn't release the ball on his free throws. He was 6'4.5" as a center, all these things, but he was a crazy impactful player. And it was because of the risk of you would look like an idiot if you brought this guy on your team. I don't know what you thought, Shane, when you were first round Chuck.
I love Chuck Wagon. Favorite teammates
you can't
of all
do anything
time.
but love Chuck, but most players who he doesn't fit the mold of hey, this guy's an NBA player until you watch him play.
Right.
Since we're talking about teammates just a little bit, and Nate Silver's name was mentioned, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that Nate's part of our group. I mean, he's not on stage at the moment, but Nate's one of us, and he's one of our contributions to the larger society.
Yeah, he's super smart.
I think Pacoda is still his creation on the baseball side.
Yeah.
So.
Well, gentlemen, this panel's over. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie.